or whatever we're doing? Good, thank you. You know, it throws me off when that pops up while I'm in the middle of talking. So, all right, 6:11, we're gonna go ahead and get started. One last time, for those of you who are just joining us, and I see there's still people coming in, so I'm gonna count to 30, and then I'm gonna repeat the instructions one last time, and then we're gonna move. Thank you all for your patience. Next time we'll let them in a few minutes early and do this, Sam and Daniel, whoever else. Learning as we go. All right, for those that are just joining us, on the screen in front of you, you will see to participate in tonight's class. You'll see a QR code on the right, and you'll see a website on the left. If you're comfortable scanning a QR code, you can go ahead and scan that code. If not, you can use your internet browser to type in www.menti.com and enter code 60695877. After you've entered that code, what you will see on your screen is a blank screen that says to participate in tonight's class. I'm going to repeat that one more time, and then we're going to move on. And if you have questions just about that, drop them in the chat and someone from our team will help you. All right. One last time. On the screen in front of you, you will see a screen that says to participate in tonight's class. On the right, there will be a QR code. If you have a cell phone, an iPad, anything like that, and you know how to scan a QR code, go ahead and scan the QR code. If you don't know how to scan a QR code or you're not able to right now, don't worry about it. Open up your internet browser, either on your phone, on your iPad, on a laptop, etc., and type in www.menti.com. You will be prompted to enter a code. You'll type in, oh, that's not nice, Mr. Martin, jealous. You'll type in 60695877. And from there, from there, you will see a blank screen again, and it's only going to say to participate in tonight's class. No cause for alarm. If that's all you see, that's all you're supposed to see. So that means you're doing it right. So for right now, everyone who is with us will see a blank screen that says to participate in tonight's class. And that's all you'll see for now. All right, Ms. James, you have a question, and then we're going to move right into the class. Unmute yourself, Ms. James.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, I had a question because I'm on my phone, and I didn't know if I could do a split screen and do this code thing, but I'm trying it now, so it may work. I don't know.
Okay. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. You won't miss anything.
Okay.
All right, let's go, y'all. Okay, so welcome to CL 1005. CL stands for Community Leadership 1005, and this is our Bylaws Clinic. My name is Leah LaRue. I'm the Assistant Director of Neighborhood Planning for the City of Atlanta's Department of City Planning, and I'm joined tonight by all of my amazing team. Samantha Terry, who's our Program Manager for Training and Education.
Hey, everybody.
Tony McNeil, who's our Program Manager for Outreach and Engagement.
Good evening, guys.
And Daniel Vasquez, who's our Manager of the Resources and Support.
Hello.
Nicole Jenkins, who's also on the Resources and Support team.
Hey, everyone.
And Kip Dunlap, who's our Resources and Support Coordinator.
Good evening, friends.
Awesome. All right, so that's our team. We're really glad to have you here with us. If this is your first time at NPU University, welcome. Really glad to have you, especially for this class in particular. And if you're returning, good to see you again. Always good to see you all. All righty. So real quickly, before we get started, I want to go over our 4 classroom rules, and particularly our golden rule. First, please keep your microphone muted at all times. If you have to ask a question or make a comment during Q&A, please raise your hand to get in the queue. If something moves you and you want to use reactions, you can just use the reactions button down below to clap or give a thumbs up. We only state that so that people don't unmute themselves to say, oh, good point, or something like that. We want to keep the class going so you can get out of here at a decent hour. And last but not least, the golden rule, all questions must be relevant to course content. Now, this class in particular is one in which we do dig into those kind of situations that might be NPU specific. Ordinarily in our classes, we prefer not to dig too deeply into questions, issues, problems that are specific only to your block or your neighborhood, because we want to make sure that everyone is getting all of the training and education that they need. But for bylaws, there is a time designated towards the end of the class for you to ask very specific questions if you have them. Other than that, please make sure that your questions are relevant to course content. And you can raise your hand by clicking on reactions at the bottom of your screen, should be at the bottom of your screen. And once you click on reactions, you will see the raise hand button, and you can go ahead and raise your hand. If you want to try that now, if you've never done it before, you can go ahead and try that. And then you'll do the same thing to lower your hand, or the staff can go ahead and lower hands for us. That's if you're new. I know at this point in the world, most of us have done this before, but if you're new or you haven't done it in a while, you can go ahead and click reactions, then raise hand. All righty. All right, so those of you that are logged on to Mentimeter, and I do want to say this, the website is at the top of the screen. So if you're just joining us, you can go into www.menti.com and use the code 60695877 to get to where we are. If for any reason at all, you are unable to access this app or this website, no worries. You're still going to get the same information that everyone else is going to get. It's just a way for us to interact a little bit more. So what topic or section of your bylaws would you like to see updated in the near future? I see that folks are already starting to answer that. You can feel free to enter multiple answers if you like. And just go ahead and type in either on your cell phone, on your iPad, or on your computer. If you're on Menti where we are, you can go ahead and type in some of the things that you think you'd like to see updated in your own bylaws. And give it a couple minutes, well, a couple seconds. I see a lot of people want to talk about elections in their bylaws, officers, communications, voting, member organizations. That's a good one. We have a brief mention of that. Removing tree regulations from their bylaws, treasury roles. It's a good one. Executive board power. That comes up in conversations a lot. Grievances, virtual meetings, not surprised there. Parliamentary procedure, voting and attendance. Good stuff. We'll close this out in about 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All righty, good stuff, good stuff. All right, so why was the NPU system created? It's really important to know why the NPU system was created when you're developing your bylaws. It's challenging, and oftentimes when I have conversations with community leaders, NPU officers and members, I often have to rein people in and kind of hit that reset button, like wait a minute, let's remember why the system was created in the first place, because it is easy to get off course or distracted by all the other things that are going on in the city and in the community. The Code of Ordinances describes that the council found it in the best public interest of the city of Atlanta to have an organized program of neighborhood planning. In section 6-3011, this is stated, the purpose of the article is to provide an opportunity for both the citizens formally to provide input into the CDP, or the Comprehensive Development Plan of the city, and to provide a means by which information concerning the operation of city government can be provided to the citizens of Atlanta. So it is both to get input from the public and to give information concerning city operations to the residents of Atlanta. Further, it's the policy of the city to coordinate the recommendations of NPUs, or neighborhood planning units, with the formulation of the city's budget, both capital and operating, in order that the CDP, or the Comprehensive Development Plan, be an effective policy guide for the orderly development of the city. What is the function of bylaws? Bylaws are the foundational documents of an organization. They exist to give an organization structure. They define the primary characteristics of the organization. They define how it functions. And importantly, they define the rights and the duties of members. Bylaws should also include the rules that an organization deems to be so important that they cannot be changed without previous notice to the members and without the vote of a large majority. One easy example that I like to give is if your NPU or your organization always serves sweet tea and cookies, you may decide one night that instead of serving sweet tea and cookies, you want to serve lemonade and lemon cake. That is not so important that you need to take a vote, especially not a vote that requires a 2/3 majority. So those are not the kinds of things that you want to include in your bylaws. Every little thing, every policy, every move doesn't have to be included in the bylaws. It should include those things that are so important to the structure of the organization, to the characteristics of the organization, to the function of the organization, so important that they cannot be changed without notice to the members and without the vote of a large majority. All right, so we're going to do another quick quiz. Who can vote on bylaws? On your Mentimeter, you should see this screen asking, you may have to click next question, by the way. Who can vote on bylaws? Is it only adults who reside in the NPU? Is it only adults who reside or work in the NPU? Is it only adults who have attended 3 or more NPU meetings? Does it depend on the bylaws? Perhaps none of the above or all of the above. And I'll state those options again, just in case the font is small on your side. Is it only adults who reside in the NPU can vote on bylaws? Only adults who reside or work in the NPU that can vote on bylaws? Only adults who have attended 3 or more NPU meetings? Or it depends on the bylaws, none of the above or all of the above? So it looks like 42% of you say that it depends on the bylaws as for who can vote on bylaws. 24% are saying all of the above. 7% are saying only adults who reside in the NPU can vote on bylaws. And 26% are saying only adults who reside or work in the NPU can vote on bylaws. And the correct answer, you know, I forgot to say at the beginning that if I experience some sort of internet technology freeze, that our team would take over as best as they could until I get back on. I forgot to say that, but I'm saying it now. All right, can everybody still see my screen? Yes, I don't see my team.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm freezing up on my side. All right, and you can see the correct answer? No. Okay, yeah, I haven't seen it on my side either. I'm gonna try again. It's not showing, but I'm gonna tell you what the correct answer is. The correct answer is none of the above. None of these are the right answer. I should have asked my team to answer that question. I did, Kip. Thanks. Actually, I did a few times. Oh, there you go. There's a delay of some sort, technology, it being what it is. But the correct answer is none of the above. That is it looks like somebody put it in after I said it. That's what happened. That's where that 3% came from. But in any case, the people who can vote on bylaws at your NPU is anyone whose primary residence is in that NPU, or who represents a business, an agency, or an organization in that NPU. Okay, that's the correct answer. It's anyone who resides, whose primary residence is in that NPU, or they represent a business, organization, or agency in that NPU. That's who can vote on bylaws. All right, okay, awesome. So what are the requirements for NPU bylaws? I know those of you that have been around for a while already know this. They must be submitted no later than September 30th, and they become effective January 1st of the following year. This is in the code. They've got to be submitted no later than September 30th, and they become effective January 1st of the following year. Also, in the code, you must attach the Code of Ordinances, sections 6-3011 through 6-3019 to the bylaws when you submit them to the city. Third, there must be no restrictions on a resident's right to vote. I'm glad that no one suggested that you have to have, or no one voted that you have to have attended 3 or more meetings in order to vote on bylaws. I'm glad you know that. There may be no restrictions on a resident's right to vote for bylaws. All right, so are NPU bylaws required to be approved by the city of Atlanta? Not a trick question. Are NPU bylaws required to be approved by the city of Atlanta? And you may have to hit next question. For those of you that may have joined us late, if you're internet savvy or phone savvy, you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 60695877 to meet us where we are. If not, don't worry about it. And the question we're answering now is, are NPU bylaws required to be approved by the city of Atlanta? So 64% of you said yes, and 34% of you said no. The correct answer is yes, NPU bylaws are required to be approved by the city of Atlanta. So what are they reviewed for? What do they have to be approved for? 1, clarity as to voting procedures. And this is a direct quote from the Code of Ordinances. Representativeness of all interested parties. Description of the duties of any subcommittees or officers. Those are the 3 things that our team reviews your bylaws to see. We look for clarity as to voting procedures, because it's required in the code that your voting procedures be spelled out clearly. We look for representativeness of all interested parties. That is admittedly a bit subjective, but we haven't had problems with that thus far. And we look for a description of the duties of any subcommittees or officers. We want to make sure that all of the subcommittees' duties are spelled out, the officers are spelled out clearly. This is important. That is all that we are reviewing bylaws. That is what we are authorized to review bylaws for. We do read every single word of your bylaws, and we do make recommendations when we see red flags. If we see something that we think will cause a problem for you, maybe it doesn't violate the code, but we know that it doesn't work because we've seen it someplace else, or we just see a gaping loophole, we'll let you know, hey, you may want to take a look at section 2, article B, because it's got some major loophole, etc. But in terms of approving your bylaws, we are only approving based on clarity as to voting procedures, representativeness of all interested parties, and description of the duties of any subcommittees or officers. Also, bylaws cannot violate law, and they should not commit the city or any other entity. All right. So this is what we think your process should look like. I will point out, just to be really clear, this is not codified or this isn't cemented in the code. This is a best practice for what your bylaws process could look like to maximize participation, to make sure that all of the residents, all of the community members are involved or have the opportunity to be involved in the amendment of your bylaws, the annual amendments to your bylaws. Starting with the committee review, the committee's bylaws committee, or whatever committee you in your NPU has purview over the bylaws, or neighborhood association, by the way. I'm talking about NPUs, but all of this is applicable to neighborhood associations as well, except that the code does not make any requirements for neighborhood associations. As for NPUs, you want your committee of purview to review the bylaws, the current bylaws, and then draft some proposed amendments. Ideally, you're working on that all year. As you're noticing opportunities for improvement, you're jotting that down, or you're discussing it with your executive committee or your bylaws committee, and you're sharing some suggestions or some ideas for proposing amendments to your current bylaws. You're drafting that throughout the year. Ideally, you'll distribute that draft to your bylaws committee, ultimately to the body at large, and you'll invite people to propose amendments. That could be as simple as an announcement at an NPU meeting, or an email blast, or posting it on social media, or a phone tree, or calling posts, whatever you use to get the word out. Hey, we're reviewing the bylaws this month. We're making amendments. Please submit any proposed amendments by July 31st, August 15th, whatever the date is that works for you all. Next, you'll finalize your draft, and you'll have a public meeting or discussion around the draft. It does not necessarily have to be a separate meeting. It could be during an NPU meeting, or it could be a bylaws committee meeting where you invite everyone to come and say, hey, we're reviewing the final draft for the bylaws. We're going to vote on this at our September meeting. So we want everybody to have the opportunity to chime in before that September meeting. And lastly, you'll vote and you'll submit those bylaws to the Department of City Planning no later than, what is the date? Say it with me. September 30th. Wonderful. All right. So we've been at this for a minute and we've learned a bunch of lessons. I'm going to take a few minutes to go through those lessons. We're still on track, on schedule. So I'll go through some of the lessons that we've learned. Samantha, by the way, and anybody else from our team, I can't see any hands raised or anything like that. So if there are hands raised, just let me know, if you will. And then when we get to a good point, I'll go ahead and take questions. So let me talk a little bit about, well, actually, before we do that, are there questions on what the code requires for NPUs? You can go ahead and raise your hand if you have questions. And what we talked about just now is what the code requires for NPUs. I'm sorry, Samantha.
One in the chat, is it duties of subcommittees or duties of committees and subcommittees?
Let me pull it up and see. I have the code open. I can look. I believe it said what I put on the screen, but one second. Thank you for your patience. My internet is especially slow today. Okay. It says, yeah, subcommittees, exactly what was on the screen. The code reads, the bylaws shall be reviewed and approved annually by the Bureau of Planning, that is now the Department of City Planning, and the Neighborhood Planning Unit for clarity as to voting procedures, representativeness of all interested parties within the Neighborhood Planning Unit, and and a description of the duties of any subcommittees or officers. That is what the code says. All right, any other questions? All righty. All right, so avoiding common mistakes. These are some of the lessons that we've learned over the last few years when it comes to bylaws. You want to include a very clear and a fair remedy for violations. The NPUs are accountable to the members. That is what the Code of Ordinances says. NPUs are accountable to the members of that NPU. If you don't have a clear and fair remedy for bylaws violations, you risk, for one, not being accountable to your members, but you also risk having to involve outside groups to help you resolve conflict, because it's not clearly stated in your bylaws what you do when you have conflict. So you'll definitely want to have some sort of a process for conflict resolution, or at the very least, a clear remedy for violations. Secondly, you'll want to include a clear and fair process for officer removal. That is important. There have been situations where officers have moved out of the city of Atlanta and wanted to continue being an active officer because they were elected, and the membership didn't think they should be an officer because they're no longer qualified to be a member, and it just becomes very messy. It's one of those things that can certainly be avoided by having a very clear and fair process for officer removal. You also want to have a process for recognizing new neighborhood organizations. I have been in this role since March of 2019, May of 2019, maybe, or March, whatever, 2019. And every year since then, there has been a question from an NPU or the neighborhood association about how the neighborhood association could be recognized by the NPU. That is not something that the city of Atlanta controls. We don't control neighborhood organizations and their recognition in the NPU. That is something for the NPU to determine, and we need NPUs to clearly state that in your bylaws. If a new neighborhood organization is formed, how will you determine whether they are recognized by the NPU or not? Number 4, you want to ensure that one section of the bylaws does not contradict another section of the bylaws. We've seen that several times as well, happens quite a bit. You also want to clarify who can cancel a meeting and under what circumstances and with what notice. We saw that with the pandemic as well, but you also want to clarify who can call a meeting, who can call a special meeting and under what circumstances. True story, last year, and all of these lessons learned are actual lessons that we have actually learned from NPUs, from problems that we've had. True story, we had a situation at an NPU where they called an executive committee meeting to take action to remove an officer. The bylaws for that NPU stated that only the officer, that particular officer, could call an executive meeting, an executive committee meeting. So the executive committee wants to vote out this person, but they can't, according to their bylaws, they can't even call that meeting because the only person who could call that meeting is the officer that they were seeking to remove. These are the things that you want to think about in advance so that you don't have to cross that bridge when you get to it. You've already got a bridge established to get over. You also want to make sure that meetings, changes that are due to public emergencies, acts of God or other acts of God or other unavoidable circumstances, such as the pandemic for one. Many of us remember March of 2020 and how NPUs were scrambling to figure out what to do next and how to, I know I was invited to countless conversations with executive boards and executive committees on what they could do without violating bylaws. You'll want to consider being able to poll or unofficially gauge the will of the body in an emergency situation. And you'll want to define what that true emergency might look like. You'll want to consider policy statements or rules for voting procedures or other sections that might need to be modified. And then, of course, outline the process for record keeping. This is really important. This is an opportunity that a lot of NPUs have for improvement, is in your record keeping. All right. How can bylaws be used to protect members? How can bylaws be used to protect members? You can type in an answer on your phone. If you go to menti.com and excuse me, and use the code 60695877. If you already have it up, you can go ahead and type in your answer. You can submit multiple answers if you like, just random thoughts. I don't need complete sentences unless you want to submit a complete sentence. But what are some of the ways that your bylaws can be used to protect members? Listing the members' rights, that's a good one. Protecting their rights, yep. Clear public policy. Oh, that's a good one, that's heavy. Clarity on rights, a lot of conversation about rights. Privacy to submit opinions, that's an interesting one. Have a meeting to discuss bylaws before voting on them, absolutely. Make sure your bylaws are reviewed and updated as needed. So to that point, I would add that the code requires bylaws to be reviewed every year. NPUs are not required to amend their bylaws every year. Many of you know that, but for those that might be new to this or may have forgotten, NPUs are not required to amend them every year, but you are required to review them and approve them. You've got to vote on them every single year. But you can definitely protect your members by reviewing and updating them. Achieve representativeness of concerns, define rights, clarifying operations, understanding who has the floor. Sorry. Okay, understanding who has the floor. The bylaws should be consistent and clear. Ensure that the body has the final decision. Inclusiveness, properly addressing the duties of each position. Outline what their role is. Have a meeting to discuss bylaws before voting on them. Showing that actions taken by the NPU are not arbitrary. That's a good one. The person, and this is all anonymous, so please don't feel compelled or pressured, but the person who said showing that actions taken by the NPU are not arbitrary, if you want to elaborate on that, please feel free to unmute yourself and talk about that. That's a really good one, I think.
Yeah, so hi.
Hey, Nick. How are you?
It's sort of like when I talk about why we have adversarial courts and stuff, you want to show that when the court operates or when the NPU operates, it's doing so according to a procedure. It's not just an exercise of power, right? So it helps by having bylaws and following the bylaws, it legitimatizes your actions. So it's important, you know, not just for the members, but it also shows that there's a rule set and that you're playing by that rule set.
Awesome, thank you. And we are on schedule. So if one or two more people want to elaborate on their answer, you can, one or two of you can just go ahead and unmute and elaborate a little bit on your answer if you'd like.
Leah, what I had put was that it protects the rights of the members. Of course, the membership or the body makes the ultimate final decision, and by having bylaws, it ensures that one individual or one hidden agenda cannot dominate over the others because it's majority rule, and that is structured by the bylaws.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Ross. I appreciate that. I want to elaborate a little bit on what Mr. Ross said, and this isn't our parliamentary procedures class, of course, but we do have 4 parliamentary procedures classes. I strongly encourage you to attend those if you haven't. I know many of you in the room have, but he hit on something really important. The individual leaders of the NPU do not make final decisions for the NPU. The decisions are made by the body. Now, there might be some administrative, day-to-day operational decisions that might be made by leadership, and that's what the elections are for. You're electing someone who you trust to decide what color the letterhead should be, or to decide whether a meeting should be canceled or rescheduled or postponed, etc. You're electing people that you trust to make those sorts of administrative or operational decisions. But when it comes to recommendations that the NPUs are making to the city, the body has the final say-so on those matters, on elections, on bylaws, and on all recommendations that come to the city. The body has the final decision. The body can also vote to overrule the decision of the chairperson, and we cover more of that. We won't get into that tonight, but we do cover that in our parliamentary procedures class. All right, we have time for one more, if one more person wants to speak to this, how bylaws can be used to protect members. All right, so we'll move on. So one example of bylaws protections is an outgoing officer asserts that the NPU's social media, website, and other items are the intellectual or other property of that officer. Let me just tell you before I get into the other 4 on this slide, every one of these items we have seen at least once. The number one, I've seen it every year since I've been in this role. There is always an outgoing officer who has created a membership database or a spreadsheet or a book of all the minutes and records, or a social media site or website or something that is password protected or within their custody. And they assert that because they created it, it belongs to them. Number 2, a neighborhood association votes to support an event application. This is another one that happens every year. The NPU votes to oppose it. The neighborhood association refers to the bylaws, which state that the NPU shall support the decision of the neighborhood association. Bylaws state that a certain committee must have 12 members. I hope that as I'm reading these, you're thinking through all the things that could go wrong. If your bylaws state that the nominations committee has to have 12 members, well, what happens if you don't have 12 members that are willing to be on the nominations committee? Then you're automatically in violation of your bylaws. So you want to think through what these requirements are in your bylaws and how you can protect your members and your organization from violating bylaws. Number 4, according to the bylaws, members must have attended 3 meetings in the calendar year to be eligible to vote. That's a trick question and a tricky subject. If I were to ask you what could go wrong, and we've asked that in years prior with this class, what could go wrong if the bylaws say that members must have attended 3 meetings in the calendar year to be eligible to vote? What could go wrong? Most people don't get that right. So I'll go ahead and tell you that wording is problematic because in January, there aren't any members who have attended 3 meetings in the calendar year. In February, there aren't any members who have attended 3 meetings in the calendar year. In March, it depends. It depends on whether your language says 3 meetings, including the present meeting or the current meeting, or 3 meetings prior to the current meeting in which they vote. These are all things that you want to think about when you're proposing amendments to your bylaws, when you're updating them or rewriting them. You want to make sure that there's no room for ambiguity in the bylaws. Number 5, the majority of the NPU's executive board and members are business representatives. residents assert that non-residents vote against the interests of the residents. That's another true story. There are clauses that could be baked into your bylaws that address those issues, including, I didn't say this, but number one, you could absolutely have clauses in your bylaws that specify and clarify that every property, intellectual or otherwise, created by an NPU officer or for the use of the NPU or in the NPU's name belongs to the NPU, not to the individual. You can absolutely clarify that in your bylaws. All right, points to ponder, as I mentioned, who owns NPU property? Who has the passwords? These are things that should be spelled out. Are your committees active? Are they functional? Are they necessary? We actually had in my own NPU last year, I believe it was, or maybe the year before last, I can't remember, but we did a pretty comprehensive rewrite of our bylaws and had to review the committees. And I'll tell you, it was, because of the role that I'm in, it was fascinating to watch the discussion around that and to watch the attachment to some of the committees. Many NPUs have a really long list of committees that are not active. And when you discuss whether they should remain in the bylaws or why they remain in the bylaws, are they functional? Are they necessary? Are they effective? Do they actually have a function? Do they do anything? When you discuss that, it's challenging to say, no, we don't need an education committee. Because who wants to be the person to say we don't need an education committee? No one wants to say that. No one wants to think that way or be that person. But if you don't have members who are willing to serve on that committee, or members who are willing to take matters that are referred to that committee, do research and provide a formal recommendation to the body, which is the purpose of a committee, then you have to ask yourself whether it belongs in the bylaws. Maybe if it's after 1 year, you could, maybe the following year, you'll continue working on getting people on that committee. But if that committee has not been functional in 6, 7 years, 5 years, et cetera, you do want to revisit whether these committees need to be a part of your NPU. You also want to consider whether your structure allows neighborhoods to make critical neighborhood specific decisions for other neighborhoods, because sometimes that happens based on how the NPU is structured. You want to consider whether residents can vote absentee or by proxy. Maybe I can't be at the meeting tonight, but my sister is there and I ask her to vote for me on this item. Your bylaws should specify whether that's okay in your NPU. Or maybe I know that I'm not going to make it tonight, but this matter is really, really important to me. So I email the chairperson and say, hey, I would like to vote no on this item. Some NPUs allow that, some don't. Consider it though, and determine whether or not your NPU wants to allow absentee or proxy voting. And if so, in what way, in what manner, on what occasions, etc. Are officers required to have residency in the NPU? The code requires chairpersons, NPU chairpersons, to reside, have primary residency in the NPU. The code does not speak to vice chairs, secretaries, parliamentarians, etc. However, there are some NPUs that prefer for all the officers to live in the NPU. There are some that have officers that don't live in the NPU, but perhaps represent a business that is in the NPU. So you'll want to consider that as well. You want to think about what makes your meetings more efficient and more participatory, for sure. You want to always think about what increases participation as opposed to what decreases participation. And then when can your bylaws be revised? And when do those revisions take effect? You'll want to consider all of those things, keeping in mind that the code states that NPU bylaws are due September 30th, and they take effect January 1st. They become effective January 1st of the following year. We went through some recommended base language for meetings last year, and I think the year before last. I won't get into that in detail now, but I'm more than happy to answer questions about it when we get to Q&A. I think almost all of the NPUs at this point have gotten this language from us or similar language, or we've worked with you to figure out what language works best for your NPU. But we definitely came up with some recommended language back in 2020, and you can use it, or you can modify it, or you can come up with your own language that works for your NPU as you see fit. Policy statements are often used to define rules for virtual meetings and for other areas of the NPU, for other things. Policy statements are useful because they typically don't require a 2/3 vote or a 3/4 vote. One example that I can think of in one NPU in particular is they made a policy around the timing of presentations and of city departmental reports. So the reports have to be no longer than 3 minutes or 2 minutes or something like that. And the questions from the public no longer than 5 minutes. And each person can only ask one question, or, you know, questions past the 5 minutes have to be dropped in the chat or can be emailed in advance, or whatever works for your NPU. But there are NPUs that have policies around how that works, policies around presentations on the NPU agenda and around applications as well. But some suggestions for your policies for your virtual meetings are that any members participating in virtual meetings must register using their full names. This is important. We've dealt with, I mean, all of this is based on experience, really. Just about everything that we cover in this class tonight is based on real life experiences that we've had with NPUs that face problems because of the way their bylaws are written or because of the things that are not included in their bylaws. So you'll definitely want to encourage people or require people to register using their full names. Family members who are eligible to vote and attending together must list all eligible and present voters. Many of you in the room today, I've talked to you about this, about once we started meeting virtually, you'll have 2 or maybe sometimes 3. On one occasion, I remember, people in a household that are there. One NPU said, well, if individuals are gonna vote, you have to be on camera because we've got to see the 2 people so that we know it's not one person saying I'm voting for my husband and my husband's not even there. These policies are for your NPU to decide, not for us to decide for you, but these are just suggestions. Anyone making or seconding a motion must identify themselves by stating their names. This is one that I strongly, strongly encourage. It isn't a requirement, but if I had the authority to make it a requirement, I would. Anyone that makes or seconds a motion should identify themselves in a virtual meeting, because there are people who, for whatever reason, maybe they're driving and they're just listening to the meeting, or maybe they're cleaning the house or cooking or helping with homework and just listening to the meeting, or maybe they're calling in from the phone and they don't know who made the motion or who seconded the motion. Every member of every organization has a right to know who is making a motion, who is seconding a motion. So that's important. It's just a good practice to say, this is Leah, and I'd like to make a motion to support this application, or et cetera. Votes to approve agendas and minutes should be conducted by unanimous consent unless a member objects. I'm happy to talk more about that, but there is a lot of time wasted in NPU, Neighborhood Association, Business Org meetings around approving agendas, minutes, and other routine items that could definitely be done by unanimous consent. To vote, eligible members have to use the yes or no buttons, and this changes. Zoom sometimes updates their features, but you know, you could certainly include in your policy statements how you expect NPU members to vote, and how you expect them to indicate their abstention, whether they're voting by phone, how you want that to happen, how the officer counts votes and reports that vote to the chairperson. All of these are things that could be included in your policy statements. Some questions to consider to help you avoid common mistakes. Should your meetings be recorded? If they are recorded, where will the recordings be stored? Because if you did not know, I can tell you these files take up a lot of space, a lot of space. So if you want your NPU to record their meetings and you want those meetings to be stored? Where are you going to store them? How long are you going to retain those stored recordings? Should the virtual meeting chat be open or should it be closed? Should the transcript be saved? Should it be saved and distributed? Can the mute function be mishandled or inappropriately used? Can the waiting room be mishandled or inappropriately used? Should meetings use the webinar function? We have NPUs that use webinars for their meetings instead of this format that we're using here today. And that's fine. It should be documented in your policy. And should notice be required for committee meetings? How much notice should be required for committee meetings? And how should that notice be given? It's important to note that NPU meetings and committee meetings are required to be open to the public. And while this has not been a problem in the last year, it was a problem at one point. So I'll point out that the public doesn't just mean the people who live in your community or who represent a business or an agency or an organization. The public is anyone. You, those of you that are here in this meeting, have the right to attend any NPU's meeting that you want to attend and any NPU committee meeting that you want to attend, whether it's your NPU or not. And you'll also want to consider how the committee members are identified. That's something that comes up often as well, whether it is identified by election or by appointment, and not just the committee chairs, but the actual members. Who are the members of this committee and how are they identified? These are things that you want to consider. Best practices for your amendment process. We talked about this a little bit, but you'll want to start by identifying a bylaws committee, however your NPU sees fit to form this committee. They're usually ad hoc committees, but I have seen at least one NPU that I know of that has a standing bylaws committee. You should outline the process and the timeline and share that very widely. Make sure that members know what the process is, what the timeline is, so that they don't get to the meeting in September. I've seen this happen. Some of you in this room have experienced it. You get to the meeting in September and you say, I'd like to propose an amendment to the bylaws. And the response is, oh, we're not taking amendments tonight. That was in June, July, and August. We had 3 meetings on that, and all of the amendments had to come in those months. It's in the policy statement. This is the way we do it. Well, if that's not publicly known, then you're going to have pushback and you're going to have people who feel excluded or disgruntled. So you want to make sure that the process is clearly outlined, the timeline is clearly outlined, and that it's distributed as widely as you possibly can. You want to meet publicly and announce all of your meetings. And make sure that those meetings are publicly accessible to people. You want to make it easy for residents to propose amendments, not difficult. You want to ensure that all members have a copy of their bylaws no later than July. Members should have a copy of their bylaws 365 days of the year. But somewhere around July, you should be distributing a copy just to make sure it's in everybody's hands. In case there are people that joined later in the year or lost their copy or don't have it or just want to have it top of inbox. Send it out again around July, June even. It's just a good practice to do that. I will also point out for those that don't know, we currently link your bylaws to your meeting agenda. So on every NPU's agenda at the bottom of the first page is a link to your bylaws. You can always, always, always access your bylaws by pulling up your meeting agenda. Any meeting agenda will have the link to your bylaws at the bottom. And we're also working on, the resources and support team is working on a library, an NPU library, where all of the bylaws will be listed on our website and easily accessible. But in the meantime, you can find it on your agenda. And you can also email any member of our team or call us and we'll be happy to send you a copy of your bylaws as well. You should consider avoiding using the bylaws to address or accommodate one person or group or a situation that is unlikely to reoccur. I've seen that probably every year. There's a group of people that are getting together like, oh, we got to change the bylaws. We need to do that. We need to put this in here, you know, to make sure that this person can't do this thing or that person can't do that thing. I think twice about that because you don't want your bylaws to be so specific and to be reactive in a way that they have a negative impact down the line, and in a way that you don't consider all of the other effects of that particular clause or that particular proposal. You'll want to distribute proposed amendments at least a month prior to the vote. It is not a good idea to present in September a whole new set of bylaws and expect people to vote on it in the moment. One of a few things is going to happen. Either people are going to leave really, really angry, or your meeting's going to be really, really long because you're going to have to discuss every one of those things and answer questions and entertain debate and all of that stuff. And debate should ideally happen at the committee meetings. So yeah, you just don't want any of that stuff to happen. You don't want people to leave disgruntled. You don't want your meeting to be really long. And the third thing that I can think of that can happen is that the vote fails, or there is no vote. No one makes a motion, or there's no motion at a committee, or no individual makes a motion. You just don't want that kind of stuff to happen. So it's best to distribute the amendments in advance, give people time to react to it, invite people to give their feedback so that you're prepared at the meeting and know what the temperature of the room is. And then thoroughly consider the ramifications of each amendment. Play around with if-thens, play around with what ifs. Well, this sounds good, but what if this happens? Even if it's outrageous and could never possibly happen, like the pandemic, think about that kind of stuff, because you just never know what could happen. All right, so lastly, if you want a perfect A, these are the things that you'll do. If you want to have the perfect bylaws amendment process, you'll want to have an open and transparent process that invites feedback. You'll want to announce the date of the meeting when bylaws will be amended. You'll want to type or print the name of the signers. I often get bylaws where people sign it. The bylaws committee members will sign it, but their names are not printed and no one knows what these signatures are. A couple years ago, I had to pull bylaws from 2011, I believe it was, or 2010. And it was so helpful to see the names of the people that were on the committee then, because the problem that we were looking into and trying to resolve was related to or began with that set of bylaws in that year, and was raised by some of the same folks that were on that committee. So it's just always helpful for historical purposes and other purposes to have the names of the signers typed out, and the signers would be the bylaws committee and the chairperson spelled out so that it's clear. You want to sign and date the approved bylaws. That's also good for historical purposes. You want to list the committee chairperson and the members of the committee. And it's a good idea to record the vote. You can handwrite that right there on the bylaws if you want, or you can type it in, but it's a good idea to record the vote by which these bylaws were passed. Don't forget to attach the Code of Ordinances. That is typically the reason that MPUs don't get that A+. Lots of MPUs forget to attach the Code of Ordinances. And above all, submit them on or before September 30th, 2022. All right, we're going to do a quick little quiz and we are finished. This is the quiz to determine who was paying attention today. We'll see what happens. This, if you're on Menti, you should be able to pick an avatar, a name, a quiz name or something like that. You'll want to go ahead and do that now. I see a number of you have joined the quiz. That is awesome. I'll give you about 5 more seconds. Again, on Menti, either on your app or you can go to the website at menti.com and use the code 60695877. And it should tell you to select a name or an avatar. I forget what it says, but you'll want to go ahead and do that. You'll have a couple of seconds, like 15 or 20 seconds to answer the question. There are only 3 questions. They're not difficult. It's all of it was covered tonight. So you ready? 5, 4. I still see people choosing, so I'll give it another 5 seconds. 5. Yep, we got more people coming in. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds. All right, let's go. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, make sure you answer fast to get more points. What must be included in every set of bylaws? You got 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Oh, look at that. Look how many people got it right. Good, awesome, cool. That's correct. The Code of Ordinances is the right answer. It has to be included in every set of bylaws. You don't have to include a membership list. You don't have to include the name of the elected officers. You don't have to include attendance requirements. It's not a bad idea to include attendance requirements and officer names and all that stuff, but you have to include the Code of Ordinances. All right, y'all need a break, a breather. Let's take a 5-second breather before we move on to the next question. And get your phone ready. I'm gonna get my phone ready too. I'm not voting, but I'm watching.
Can you get a copy of the Code of Ordinances?
Can you have a copy of the Code of Ordinances?
Yes.
Yes, I can drop the link in the chat, sure.
I'm not able to see the chat. Who can I email?
I'll email it to you, Mrs. Ziegler.
Okay, I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Please do make sure, everyone, that you're raising your hand before you unmute, if you don't mind. And Ms. Gilliam, I see your hand is raised. Give me one moment, okay? We're gonna move on to the next question. I'll take questions right after this, y'all. All right. Oh, look who, let's see who's winning, who's winning, who's winning. That's so funny. Kippo was the fastest. Nick was second fastest. Leslie did all right. All right, cool, everybody. Moving on. All right. Question number 2. We're going to start the countdown. Make sure you answer quickly. When are bylaws due? If anybody gets this wrong, I'm going to cry because I said it like 30 times. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Looks like, oh, I see a September 1st. Somebody said September 1st, but that's okay. Mostly everyone else said September 30th, which is great. The correct answer is September 30th. Awesome. Sweet. All right, looks like Kippo is still ahead. Nick is still next. Leslie's still third up. Nicole is still fourth, and Jen is fifth. All righty, last question, y'all. Can staff please mute that hot mic? Thank you. What are the 3 things the city reviews in the NPU bylaws? You've got, I gave you a little extra time on this one, 25 seconds. What are the 3 things the city reviews in the NPU bylaws? I will do it myself. Fairness, inclusion, and transparency, attendance requirements, election procedures, and representativeness, or clarity in voting, representativeness, and description of duties. The correct answer is clarity in voting, representativeness, and description of duties. And let's see who got that right. Well, let's see if they let me go to the next screen. Okay, there we go. Ooh. I don't know. If Kippo stands for Kip Dunlap, you don't count because you're staff. I'm going to assume Kippo is, but then again, you are taking the class and you are an MPU member, so that's fair. All right, well, Kippo won. Congratulations to Kippo. We were going to give a prize, and I'm going to decide whether or not Kippo can get that prize. But staff, if y'all will jot down, and I'll do a screen share as well. I mean, screenshot of all the names that participated here on that made the leaderboard, I should say. I want to make sure we get them some gifts. Although I don't know who Bodie McBoatface is, but the names that we recognize, we can get them some gifts. All righty. Well, everybody, that is the end of the presentation. And at this time, we can take some questions. I am getting a pop-up that my connection is weak. So
Do you want to take the questions in the chat first and then recognize the hands?
no, I don't want to worry about the chat. I would like for people to raise their hands and ask the questions. I thought we weren't even gonna, I thought we had said we weren't doing the chat questions, but I may have missed that. But in any case, if you have a question, please do raise your hand. If you came in late, you're not allowed to ask questions because you probably missed whatever it is your question is and asking. I'm halfway joking. I do want to answer your questions, even if you came in late, but I might charge you. So, all right, Miss Gilliam. You got to unmute yourself, Miss Gilliam.
I was trying to participate and it wouldn't let me, I couldn't answer any of the questions or anything, but it's okay. We're past it. I'm up.
Here's what's important. Did you know the right answers?
Yes, I got all my notes.
There you go. Good. I love to hear it. Miss Moore, Mother Moore. Hi, Mother Moore. What's your question?
Good evening. I just want you to know that the one that said September 1st was me. It was a typo now. I know it was September.
I know you know. I know you know, Mother Moore.
Thank you.
That means everybody got it right. Awesome. Glad to hear that. Good to see you, Mother Moore. Leslie Ramirez, you're up next.
Yes, I like the way that this was interactive and engaging with everyone. I really enjoyed the presentation and the team community building with you guys. So I'm very, very thankful. This was awesome.
Awesome. Good. Thank you, Leslie. Listen, these first 4 questions were amazing. Keep it like that. Let's stay right there. Easy stuff. Thank you, Leslie. Chandra.
Yes, apologies, I was late. I had another meeting before then. But I agree, it was a great class. You did a wonderful job of sharing really pertinent knowledge. I did have a question about one of the examples you were given about the NPU not voting against a neighborhood association. Can you expound on that? Because that happened at our NPU this year, and I was concerned about it, but didn't know what actions.
I'm very happy to elaborate on that. I'm glad that you asked that question to give me the opportunity to elaborate on that. Okay, so listen, you can put whatever you want to put in your bylaws, but it's not a good idea to put in your bylaws that the NPU has to support the recommendation of the neighborhood. The reason is that the NPU is made up of individual people who have an individual right to vote how they individually please. For example, I live in ABC neighborhood and I am a part of NPU J, which is my real NPU. I live in NPU J. And perhaps there is a rezoning application down the road in another neighborhood, an XYZ neighborhood. And that neighborhood feels adamantly that this should be approved, that the city should approve this rezoning application. I personally disagree. As a resident, as a taxpayer, as a member of this NPU, I have the right to vote no, even if my neighbors think the answer should be yes, or think that the recommendation should be yes. My individual vote for my household can be no. And the bylaws can't restrict how I vote individually as a person. So there is no way to require the NPU to support the recommendation of the neighborhood. You could encourage, for sure. You could say, trying to think of a neighborhood over your way. You could say Cascade Heights voted to support this. The zoning committee voted to support this, and we think it'll be great for the community. Is there a motion from the floor? And then someone makes a motion to support it. you could do it that way, and you could outline. One of the things that I've recommended to MPUs that have had this, it's come up in 2 MPUs that I can think of off the top of my head. The recommendation that I made to those MPUs is to give the opportunity, and other MPUs do this as well, which is where I got the idea from, to give the opportunity to make a motion to the neighborhood association, the impacted neighborhood. So you could include in your bylaws that the impacted neighborhood will be invited to make a motion, or representative of the impacted neighborhood will be invited to make a motion, or that the zoning committee will consider, et cetera. There are a whole bunch of different ways you can do it. There are a whole bunch of different ways you could do it, but the one way you can't do it is to say that the MPU has to support the recommendation of the neighborhood. Did that answer your question, Ms. Chandra?
Yes, thank you. It did. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Jennifer. Hi, Ms. Jennifer.
Hi. I'm glad you brought that up, Chandra, because my question is whether or not the NPU has a responsibility to check that the neighborhood association that's recognized is actually representing the neighborhood. Why I ask that is because there recently was an application in my NPU. I was at the neighborhood meeting where the general body voted not to support the applicant. And then when it came in front of the NPU, the executive committee or the board of the neighborhood association had decided that they would support it. So the NPU had no way of knowing that the general body opposed. And I don't know under what authority the board could go against the general body. So is there anything in place for the NPU to actually check and see if what they're getting from the neighborhood association is representative of the neighborhood?
Yeah, actually that has come up in another NPU as well. And I, about 2 years ago, made, I can send you that language if you'll remind me, because I'll probably forget, or maybe someone from my team can remind me. I'll send you that language, Jennifer. But I did send them a recommendation on some language to address that. And basically what I suggested in that situation, give me a second to remember exactly what it was, because then I'll remember what the language was. Oh, I know what it was a requirement around requirements with an S at the end around how neighborhood orgs are recognized, or what the standards are for recognition. A lot of NPUs have incorporated in recent years language for how they'll recognize neighborhood organizations, but there are no standards. And this year alone, I have seen conflict in NPUs, 2 of them that I can think of, NPUs where there are people representing neighborhoods. They represent this community, like I'm the representative for this neighborhood. And I'm invited to speak at my NPU on behalf of my community. I give all the updates for my community. At the end, when there's announcements and all that, it's me that they call to give the updates. It's me that they ask, hey, what was the neighborhood sentiment on this application? And I'll share, well, the neighborhood really supports this, blah, blah, blah. But the NPU discovers that those neighborhoods have not had meetings in years. True stories, y'all. These are true stories. These are things that actually happen. Daniel's got that look on his face because he knows. These are things that really, really happen. So it is, I'm glad you asked that question. It is a good idea to have language in your bylaws that say, for example, and it's connected to the issue in other NPUs where the majority of the board members didn't live in the NPU, or the majority of the membership don't live in the NPU. And it's one of those things where NPUs can control that. Like, you have the right to create bylaws that say, this is what our executive board has to look like. This is what our executive committee has to look like, or this is what all of our neighborhood organizations that are affiliated with this NPU or recognized by this NPU, this is what they have to do. They have to meet at least once a quarter, or they have to have elections once a year, maybe once every other year, whatever works for you, where they have to have, you know, whatever due structure is acceptable by this NPU, or you know, their meetings have to be open to the public, like everybody has to be able to go to these meetings, or whatever works for your NPU. What I'm trying to encourage you to do, all of you, is to think that through. Think through what works for your NPU and what type of language you could include to make sure that happens. But you could definitely have some standards around what a neighborhood organization has to do in order to be recognized by the NPU. Even meetings that in that same situation, in that same, or maybe it was a different one, I don't remember, but in one of them, there was a situation where the neighborhood association meets at a person's house in their garage, which is fine, unless that person doesn't like the neighbor, or the neighbor doesn't like that person and isn't welcome at their home, or maybe just perception. Maybe they just don't feel welcome at that home. But if that's where the neighborhood meetings are, do you really get to participate? Like, are you really open to participating if the meeting is at, you know, a place that you don't want to go? And so they, in particular, at that particular place, they discussed that and talked about language around that as well. Maybe you want the meetings to be held in a public place, or maybe some people have issues with meetings being held in churches. Maybe you don't want a meeting held in a church, or maybe you don't want it held, you know, I don't know, wherever. But all of that stuff, you can think through all of that and figure out what works for your NPU and bake that into your bylaws. Did that answer your question, Jennifer? Good, thank you. Mr. Ross?
Yeah, Leah, I don't know if I missed it or not, but you know, one of the things that we make sure we include in our bylaws is that if something occurs that is not covered specifically in the bylaws, we defer to Robert Rules of Order. Was that mentioned?
No, thank you. That was not mentioned here. I think most of the NPUs use Robert's Rules of Order as their rule of order, as their parliamentary procedure. I know that M in particular comes to mind as one that does not. They wrote their own rules of order. There are a couple of others that don't use Roberts. I can't remember which ones they are, but there are a few that don't. And you obviously can use whatever rule of order you want, but it is a good idea to indicate that anything that's not covered expressly in the bylaws. Rosenberg's, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. Lau. Rosenberg is what M uses. There's another one that wrote their own rules of order, and I can't remember which one it is. But it is a good idea to include in your bylaws that anything that's not expressly stated in these bylaws, you'll defer to whatever rule of order. Nicole, hey, Nicole.
Hey, I have two questions. When we were talking about policies, does that actually go into the bylaws? Or are those more just best practices that would be in a separate attachment, or something that's just kind of shared within the community? Or how would you keep that in order? And then also about the absentee and proxy voting, what's kind of the best practice with that? Because we've had some issues, like you said, where people aren't having on video, but yet they're voting for 4 people and I've never seen them.
Yeah, I think I've seen that in your NPU, as a matter of fact. I think y'all discussing that. So my memory is real short. What was the first question again?
About the policies versus that go into the bylaws.
I don't recommend putting it into the bylaws, because then you have the same stringent requirements for changing it. The purpose of the policy sheet is so that you have excuse me, those things that are not so material to the organization that they should not be changed at all without some serious consideration and a huge majority vote. The policy is a little bit more flexible, and they may change from administration to administration. Maybe one chairperson prefers to have voting items first and presentations next, or vice versa. something along those lines. You want to include that kind of stuff in your policy statement so you can change that easily without requiring a 2/3 vote or 3/4 vote. And the second question, sorry.
About the absentee and proxy voting, what's the best way to place that in our bylaws? What's the best practice with that?
So I don't know that I don't know that the Department of City Planning could make a will make a recommendation on whether or not to allow absentee or proxy voting. It really does depend. And here's one of the reasons why. NPUs B, E, and N are, they have representative voting. That means that every member, every person that lives there doesn't come to the NPU meeting and vote. There is a representative that is elected or selected by the neighborhood to represent that neighborhood at the NPU meeting. That means typically that it's a much smaller group of people that are voting. And it could make more sense in a setting like that to say, hey, I'm the president of ABC neighborhood. I'm the representative at this NPU. I can't be there tonight, so I'm going to send the vice president in my stead. It kind of makes sense to allow proxy voting in that case. It makes sense to allow even absentee voting. There are a couple of NPUs that I know, one that I know for sure uses absentee voting. Two, actually, I just thought of another one, two that use absentee voting. And they're much smaller. So the reason that I can't really make a recommendation is that it depends on the NPU. In an NPU like yours, I think it would be a record-keeping nightmare to do that. So I don't really think it's a good idea, but if y'all want to, I'm happy to work with you on some language to make it happen.
And currently we're sticking with, it's just not allowed.
Yeah,
Been too complicated.
It would be complicated and a bit of a nightmare for your NPU, I think. All right, did that answer your questions, Nicole? Yes, awesome. Coy Fisher.
Okay, yes, thank you. A question about updates. Once a proposal has been submitted to the committee, the Bylaws Committee, what is your recommendation or what is the best practice if you should want to make a change to that proposal once it's been submitted and before it's presented to the body?
Say that one more time.
Okay, so you submit a bylaw change.
You as a member submit
a bylaw,
a proposal to
yes,
amend the bylaws, and you submit it to who?
The Bylaw Committee, or okay, you follow the process, whatever that is, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's in their hands. However, it could be, and I'll just give you this scenario, let's let it play out, that you go to the committee meeting, there's some dialogue and you realize that that it could be improved, that there are some changes that you should make for the betterment of the organization. So you want to amend it. My question is, what are the best practices on amending at that point?
I don't know that I can answer that question. I feel like that question would warrant an offline conversation, because I would have a bunch of questions like to get to the bottom of what you're asking. I don't know that there is an answer, like a blanket answer to that question. If I propose an amendment, like I'm going to keep it simple. Let's just say that our bylaws require you to attend 3 meetings before you can vote, and I think it should be 2. So I propose 2. Then for whatever reason, there's conversation had or whatever, and I think it should be 3.5, or let's say I think it should be 4 now. The way to accomplish that is to make another, to propose another amendment, to say again to your representative on the committee. If you're not on the committee yourself, you'll say to a member of the committee, hey, I proposed 2, but now I'd like to propose 4 instead. And that's how you do that. If you are a member of the committee, you can make a motion. You can say, I'd like to make a motion to amend Article B, Section 3 to read as follows, and you'll read that out. Does that answer your question?
I believe so. If I could restate, while in committee, the bylaw could be changed at that time by the committee so that, no, I see you shaking your head.
The proposed amendments can be changed.
Yes,
Yeah, the bylaws can't be changed at a bylaws committee meeting.
proposed amendment. I'm forgive the wording, but
Yes, the proposed amendments can be changed. Yes, that's correct.
so I'm sorry, just during this meeting, and of course, the purpose and intent is this is the bylaws review purpose, but it is absolutely customary that the bylaws committee would make amendments while they're in meeting, correct?
No. Mm-mm.
No, my question is, your suggestion in terms of a resolution is customary. Let's back up. You gave me a solution, yes?
I don't know if I gave you a solution. I feel really confused by this, honestly.
No problem. I don't want to take up everyone's time.
I want to give you really good information, but I feel like I don't have enough knowledge around what we're talking about here. And I don't want what I'm saying to be used the wrong way just because I don't know what we're talking about.
No problem.
But what I can say is this: the bylaws committee makes a recommendation to the body, but committees don't make decisions. Committees review and do the day-to-day work, and then they make a recommendation to the body. The body votes on that recommendation. That's the way it should work, ideally, and that goes for all your committees. Your committees are doing homework, they're reviewing matters, they're digging deep and doing the work so that they can come to the general body and make a recommendation. One easy reason for that is that the two reasons that come to mind immediately. One is that the people who are on the committee are the people that should ideally be really, really knowledgeable about whatever subject that is. So these are people that you trust to lead this work and to make recommendations to the body. That's one reason. The other reason is that it saves time in the meeting so that you're not having a committee meeting during a general body meeting. You're not asking all the questions that should have been sorted out at the committee meeting. You're not digging deep and crossing out commas and crossing out periods and moving this word over here during a general body meeting. That's the kind of stuff that should be done during the bylaws committee meeting. The bylaws committee is where all that work is done, where proposals are recommended, where people are voting down this idea, voting up that other idea, marking up drafts, exchanging drafts between each other, and commenting on this possibility and what this could mean if you do that, et cetera. Then the bylaws committee, at the end of that process, votes on this final document. Like, this is our final draft. We've done all this work for 6 months, 3 months, whatever, and this is our final draft. I'd like to make a motion to approve this final draft and recommend approval to the body. Someone seconds it, you vote on it. Then you take that draft to the general body, and the motion out of the bylaws committee is to approve these new bylaws, and the body votes on the bylaws committee's recommendation.
Thank you.
Does that help, Coy? You know what, I'm gonna say this much because I still feel a little bit unsettled. I'm gonna ask somebody from my team to drop my email address and my phone number in the chat. Please do reach out to me if that wasn't helpful, and we can talk through it offline. Mr. Martin?
Yes, I have sort of two questions, but they're interrelated. You had said that you thought it was a good practice for NPUs to include a provision that allows members of the affected neighborhood to make the first motion on a topic. And my NPU that has that in its bylaws, and it has, at least in one occasion, proven problematic. And when I asked the city council parliamentarian about it, his recommendation was that it not be in the bylaws.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing now from you, this is good. And I was hearing from him, this is bad. And so I'm a little bit torn as to, you know, which of those two opinions I should be believing.
Yeah, so Dennis and I don't always agree I defer to his expertise because he's a registered parliamentarian, trained and very experienced, and I'm not a registered parliamentarian. And he defers to my expertise because I know the NPU system like no other. And a lot of, sometimes his advice is relevant to other types of organizations and other types of bodies and not so specific to the NPUs. I fully understand why he would not recommend doing that. I think that it is a good idea for those NPUs where it is a good idea. Does that make sense? And I'm not trying to be, I promise you, I'm not trying to be ambiguous here.
I understand, but I mean, the issue in my MPU, which came up this year, was about what constitutes an opportunity to make a motion. And I had one interpretation of it and a member had a different interpretation of it. But it's not strictly defined a moment in time in a meeting. It's not defined in Robert's rules, certainly not defined in our bylaws, because in fact, anyone who has the floor technically has an opportunity to make a motion. Which brings me then to my second question, which was, you had said that it was a good idea in our bylaws to have a procedure for conflict resolution spelled out that is internal to the NPU, so that people don't pester external bodies like yourself with internal NPU matters. And I can understand why you would think that was a splendid idea, but you didn't offer up any sort of a framework that you thought was good or that worked. Do you have a boilerplate of what works in that context?
Nothing works, Mr. Martin. No. Sorry, listen, it's late. I'm hungry. I'm tired.
What you're saying our bylaws should include a provision that no one pesters you?
Well, those are your words. I didn't say that, but and I don't mind. Honestly, I'd rather be pestered at the beginning than after things blow up. So I really do prefer to be called, emailed, text, knock on my front door, whatever. I prefer that than having things blow up and I've got to try to play cleanup woman, which I'm not that good at. That said, I want to say this though, before I get to the conflict resolution thing, Mr. Martin, another thought came to mind. A neighborhood could, you know what? No, let me think through that a little bit more before I say that out loud. I just want to make a note so I don't forget what I want to discuss, and I'll think that through and I'll call you on that. I'm thinking about neighborhoods making formal recommendations as a committee would. That's my train of thought, but I want to think through that a little bit more and then I'll have that conversation with you. As for conflict resolution, it's my understanding that a few years ago, I think 2017 or 18, the city did provide a paragraph or two that was recommended language for resolving certain types of conflict. I'm pretty sure I could get my hands on that and I'm happy to share it. But personally, I think Robert's rule, I think it's a little strict. Robert's rules, their sections on conflict resolution they require like a formal hearing and all kinds of other, it's pretty heavy. It feels pretty serious. But in any case, it is an option for sure. And I know you have Robert's rules yourself. You have access to that if you want to use that. But the city does have a shorter version. We've talked through it, Mr. Martin, in the conversations on best practices. We have talked a little bit about what that could look like. That's it. That's the I think 12th edition or something like that. 13th. We talked through 12. Okay, cool. We've talked through our department leadership wasn't really thrilled with some of the language that we used in the best practices draft on conflict resolution. And we had a pretty good conversation around what it should look like, what it could look like and how sticky it is. It's just complicated. It really is complicated. But like with everything else, I'm more than happy to talk to any of you offline or direct you to one of my team members who could help as well. And we can sort this stuff out. It's complicated because there are 25 NPUs with 25 different cultures and ways of doing things. So for a lot of this stuff, there isn't a blanket answer, including some of the things that I discussed in the class. There are some of those things that will apply to some NPUs and not to others. Some of them do not make sense for all of the NPUs. Ms. Rita, good to see you, Ms. Rita.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you, Leah, for the course. So my question or concern is determining eligibility, especially in this COVID time that we're in. How do we truly determine eligibility? Who is truly able to be considered a voting member?
That depends on your bylaws, and the bylaws should be written in a way that clarifies that and answers that question for you. That's not me kind of passing the buck, but seriously, the bylaws need to answer that question for you, who should be eligible. There are NPUs that don't have any attendance requirements for voting.
Well, and I'm sorry to pause you. I didn't really mean to ask you about that particular piece, but in terms of when we were meeting in person, we could check IDs or what have you. So how do we change it for today? Are there any best practices that anyone has ever used or has used now that we're in this Zoom environment, in this virtual environment, that says, hey, I am a member of this NPU?
I got you. So there is no one answer for that either, because there is an NPU that I think does that very well. That's NPU F, as in Frank. If any F people are here, shout out to you. But NPU F does a really good job of requiring people to register every year. They have an annual registration. And before you can vote, you have to submit, you have to fill out a very short, easy form, and then you have to submit proof of residency as well, or proof of eligibility to vote, whether it's residency or representing a business, et cetera. They have a short form. There's a link on their website. You click that link, you fill out the form, you upload your driver's license or your utility bill or whatever it might be. The reason that I say that it really depends, because that doesn't work in an NPU that has a lot of members that aren't technologically savvy or that aren't comfortable with technology. That let me put it this way, NPUs that have a lot of members where that would present a burden or an obstacle or barrier, it's not a good idea to do it that way. In the COVID era, yeah, the only thing that I could recommend is doing that, requiring people to send in, to submit proof of residency, and maybe giving them tell them drop it in the mail. If you're not comfortable using the website, you can, drop a copy in the mail or something, or text us a picture, something like that. Just making sure that there is some flexibility for those who are not comfortable or who don't have access to technology, because we still have a population of people that don't have access. Does that answer your question, Rita?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. That does help a bit.
Okay, awesome. CJ, hi CJ, long time no see.
Hold on. Hi, Leah. How are you? And your whole team. That's my first time seeing everybody, all the new people.
Yeah.
Nice. So my question has to do with a compliment, okay? I'm complimenting this clinic. This is my second time taking it. As you know, I'm the chair for my Ethics, Policies, and Bylaws Committee in NPUG, right? And so every year our bylaws are due in September. And you guys give so much pertinent information, jewels, ideas, suggestions, things of that nature in this class, right? And so my question is it at all possible that this class is given earlier in the year so that we have time to digest all of this good information and hash it out, talk with people? I mean, does that make sense? What I'm asking?
I'm gonna let Samantha Terry answer that question.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Brooks, we're actually going to offer it in June, I believe.
Yes, I was gonna say June. Give me some time to get these things together because it is so much good information and I am so appreciative for it. But I'm telling you, every year I'm all excited. I'm like, okay, we got it this time. I know it's a working document, but I'm thinking I'm just gonna send this. We're just gonna, keep them as they are. And then every time I take this class, I'm like, oh God, I gotta add something or do something else.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I actually, in preparing for this class tonight, I told Samantha, I think it was Monday or Tuesday of this week, I said, I was looking at the old presentation from 2020 and it said that it was in July and it said next year we'll have it in June. And I'm like, so why are we having it in August? Like what happened? So she made a note to make sure we move it to June for next year.
Wonderful. I'm so happy to hear it. Thank y'all.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for the question. Miss James. Hi, Miss James.
Hi, Miss LaRue. I love your hair, first of all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I wanted to ask when it is, I wrote the question down, where is it? Okay, when it is proper or appropriate to amend bylaws.
Oh, Lord, that's a sticky doggone question, Miss James.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so this is what I'm going to do because it's always safest to do it this way. I'm going to stick to the code. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to read to you and I can pull it up on my screen as well. Yeah, let me do that because it's just the safest way to do it. And listen, y'all, when I read y'all what this code says, don't ask me no follow-up questions because it's just going to be the code. I'm just going to tell you what the code says. I'm just kidding. Okay, but the code says right here, I hope you can read this, but if not, don't worry, I'll read it out loud. NPU bylaws shall be submitted to the Bureau of Planning, that's now the Department of City Planning, no later than September 30th of each year for compliance with city code requirements. Said bylaws shall become effective January 1st of the following year. Number 3 says this article, which is section 6-3011 through 6-3019, shall be attached as an exhibit to the bylaws of each NPU with each annual submission to the Bureau of Planning, currently known as the Department of City Planning. So bylaws have to be submitted to planning by September 30th. They become effective January 1st. Bylaws become effective January 1st of the following year. And the code should be attached to those bylaws with each annual submission. And that's my answer. Does that answer your question, Ms. James?
It does not, but you said don't ask any follow-up questions, so I guess I'll have to email you. I got your information now from the chat.
Yeah.
Because I know you're hungry.
Okay. Well, I'm fine. It's not that. I'm fine. It's sticky because NPUs do it. I am not always in agreement with the way different NPUs handle that. And I don't want to go on the record saying what you can and can't do because it is unfortunately it is subject to interpretation. It really is. The code is not, the code just says this and that's it. Like that's all it says. And anything else is interpretation. And I don't want to get into interpretation. I think it's safer to follow the code and do them manually, submit them once a year, effective January 1st, and let that be that. That's what I think is safest. But I do acknowledge that different NPUs do that differently. Ms. Jennifer.
Thank you.
Yes, I just wanted to follow up. on the code that you were just reading, and it's when it says the resident, there's no restrictions to residents, people voting. Does that mean only the residential members are allowed to vote, or has that changed to all eligible members can vote, like the business people and representatives and things like that?
So that's I love that you asked that question, because it gives me the opportunity to share some nerdy info that I wouldn't have shared otherwise. And by the way, I just dropped a link in the chat to the code so that you'll all have it. I linked directly to that section that's relevant to the NPUs. So you can click on that at your leisure or bookmark it, save it, etc. And Mr. I forgot who it was, but Mr. Harden, I will make sure that you get an email version of the code. So the code actually defines residence, Jennifer, and it, let me see, I'll pull that up as well. Or I would have pulled it up if I could find it. Somehow it just disappeared. But it does, in any case, the code, oh, here it is. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the code defines resident, and hopefully you all can see it, but I'll read it out loud for any, if the font is too small. Resident shall mean any person 18 years of age or older whose primary place of residence is within the neighborhood planning unit or any corporation, organization, institution, or agency which owns property or has a place of business or profession within the NPU. So resident has a definition that differs a little bit from Webster's or Merriam-Webster or the other dictionaries. It includes business representatives and corporations, organizations, etc.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. I don't see any other hands raised. I am very glad. I do see some of the feedback. I'm glad that you all appreciated or enjoyed the class, got something out of it. That's always good. If you have any last questions, we have about a minute left before Samantha kicks us out of the Zoom room. And she's going to give you a quick update on upcoming classes that we have. I don't see any other hands, so I'm just going to say thank you all for being here. Thank you for some really, really, really good questions. I love good questions, and you guys brought the best questions ever. So thank you for that. Thank you for being here. And above all, thank you for caring about your community. Seriously, you got to care to be here in this class tonight. You have to care to be involved in your NPU or your neighborhood association, especially at the level of caring about bylaws. You really, really care. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you for taking the time to attend this class with us and asking all the really good questions, etc. Please, 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 I'm going to say this and then I'm going to switch over to Samantha. Please do not hesitate. If there was anything that wasn't answered thoroughly, that left you confused, that wasn't clear, or you think of a question after the class is over, just about everybody in this room that has ever reached out to me knows I welcome emails, calls. I'm often very busy and I might not be able to roll out the red carpet for every call, but I do my best. And I will always take your calls, answer your questions the best that I can, and get back to you when I don't know the answer. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our whole team is like that. We really do get some real pleasure out of helping people and out of serving all of you. So please don't hesitate to call me, email me, text me, ring my doorbell, but maybe not at nighttime, but yeah, all that other stuff. Daniel said, don't ring his doorbell. Daniel's shaking his head, no, don't ring his doorbell. But seriously, please feel free to reach out if we could do anything to help or answer any questions that weren't clear to you tonight. All right, Sam, let's close this joint out. Do you need me to pull it up, Sam? Because I still have it up. No problem.
So everyone, tonight you all are going to receive via email an evaluation. We ask that you please, 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 please complete this evaluation. We want to make sure and ensure that NPU University continues to go well for you all, but we don't know what we're not doing right or well if you don't tell us. So please submit the evaluation once you receive that via email. And our upcoming courses for the remainder of this month, we have on Wednesday, August 31st, CO 1006, Election Integrity, and that's at 6 p.m. Next month, we have our P1008.001 Atlanta City Design course, and that's on a Thursday, September 8th at 6 p.m. And following a couple of weeks after that, we will have CL 1003.004 Parliamentary Procedures for the role of the chairperson. And that's Thursday, September 29th at 6 p.m. To register for more information about any of these courses, please visit www.npuatlanta.org. And to follow us on social media, whether that's Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, our handle is at NPU Atlanta. And we're also on Nextdoor at City of Atlanta Neighborhood Planning Units. Without further ado, you all have a good night.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.